and we do have Nancy Kerr Allison is here and Susie Silbert, and this is our very first, let me do one more thing. Maybe I can do it this way. I'm not Dr. Fisher. I'm trying as hard as I can to get you in here, but now I do not see. Do you see her, Susie?
I do see her.
There she is. Okay, I got it now. There's so many people came in. There we go at the right time. Dr. Fisher, can you hear us now? Hey, fabulous. All right, we're all here now. Good. Only 4 minutes into it. Apologize for that. I'm just going to go ahead and start. Thank you, first of all of you, my panelists, for being here, and our participants. This is our first ever teleconference to really discuss issues that are of importance to the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. So let me do a little housekeeping first. If people are chatting to me, which I see they are, I will get to you, but in a minute. So I have everyone on mute, supposedly. So that means when you come in, you'll be muted. So if you do want to communicate, you do have to chat. I'm also recording this. So this presentation will be available on our website, thecontemptglass.org, so you can see that later. And let me introduce our panelists. I'm really excited for our panelists today because we have had questions, a lot of questions about how do we attract a different audience. And I thought, what better way to find that out than actually go to a younger audience who also happen to be experts in the glass field. So I want to thank our panelists today. Most of you know Susie Silbert. She is the curator of modern and contemporary glass at the Corning Museum of Glass, and a lot of us have known Susie for a long time, watched her career progress, and are absolutely thrilled she's in the position she's in. So thank you for joining us today. Nancy Kerr Allison, I first met when she was at Penland working in the development department, and she's now in international studies, a master's level student, actually international development, not just studies. Nancy, are you available can you hear us? And
I can hear you just fine, and my video says that it's turned off by the administrator, so it's not letting me turn it on. Maybe you can
that would be me. That would be me. I'll see what I can do about that in just a second. And then we have Dr. Good, thank you. We're happy to have you here. We'll see you in a minute. Let me get Dr. Alysia Fischer, who those of you who are at SOFA met Dr. Fischer. She is the one who is responsible for the studio glass movement in Western North Carolina history. She's got a rich history in being a glass artist herself, starting with Stephen Powell and working with Leah Wingfield, and has also spent 10 years digging archaeologically while she was getting her PhD in Israel, and specifically in glass. So welcome, three of you. And welcome everyone else who's here. Really appreciate it. Let's start off first with really talking about what we're here about today. And I'd love for each of you just to give an opening statement. Susie, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go with Nancy and then Dr. Fisher, about primarily if you were telling people what one thing they should do to attract a younger audience, what would that be?
I always like to go clean up.
That's right.
But I'll do my best. So the first thing I guess would be to invite people, make the field something that folks have an interest in, and the way that I really see that is by encouraging young collectors and also young artists. So allowing people to feel like the field is something that they can get into and build up on their own. They don't need to start with buying Linos. That's hard for a lot of people.
Okay, Nancy, we don't see you yet, but we'd like to hear from you.
I would say meeting that person where they are. That you have to find that you can't expect them to make the leap to where you are in collecting, that you have to, if you want to convert someone new, that you have to meet them where they are and help them make that transition.
Okay, Dr. Fischer?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of the same things that they've already said, but this idea of an entry point, what is the entry point? What was your entry point? What got you excited about glass? First piece of glass people would buy would be something small and probably reasonably priced, and they may not even love that piece later, but what is that piece that pulls them in and why? And so to think about that, and I think mentioning, it's already been mentioned, this idea of the artists and supporting the artists who are not, who are not at that high level necessarily, but who need to get their work out there and have people purchase it. And we can talk more about the specifics of that later, but I was really paying attention to how that was working at SOFA.
Good. I think in our discussions prior to this conversation today, a lot of things came up. And one of the things I loved was the concept of, if you want to attract a younger audience, a more diverse audience, that you build avenues starting today for the future. So I'll start backwards this time. Dr. Fischer, if you were building avenues for the future for AACG, what would those avenues be?
Well, what I'll do is tell a story from SOFA about an artist who was selling their work pretty inexpensively, between $150 and $600. And when I asked him why he was doing that, because that's not necessarily the venue for those price points, he said this is the third year that he had done it, and that he was building his own base of collectors, and that people were now seeking him out. And so it's just sort of, in some ways, a different model where he's trying to excite people who know nothing, as opposed to, again, trying to lead people into it. And I thought that was an interesting model because it certainly worked for him.
Well, good.
Well, he was selling very well. But yeah. So maybe those are some of the future folks that are going to end up collecting more and more glass, but here you have somebody who's kind of doing the work of getting the people excited. And maybe that's the kind of person who needs to be getting grants of some sort to continue them in their work.
I know who that artist is, so I'll pass that along to our visionary committee. Nancy, what do you say to, if you were building avenues for the future, what would you instruct AACG to do?
I really think that mentorship is an important component in helping collectors make that leap. So I'm not elaborating much on that, but I think mentorship is something that the AACG, many of you probably could point to a mentor in your own collecting life. And so finding a way to structure and promote mentorship and target that mentorship towards people that have an affinity and likelihood, and helping them to build on that. So mentorship would be my answer to that question.
Susie Silbert.
I think mentorship, I think both of those are really great. I think mentorship is a wonderful thing. I feel like the more that I speak to collectors, the more I realize that there are particular people that they have learned from. I think AACG, through the travel program, going to visit other collectors' houses and collections as part of that. But I would take, from kind of an institutional approach, two different kinds of things that I think are really kind of actionable. One is bringing in new collectors, new artists, new audiences, building the next generation. I'll talk about that in a second. And the second is building bridges to the future to preserve the work and the collections and the artists that you have already. So what I mean by that is, when I talk to collectors, and really most of you, I think, probably on the phone, one of the things that animates you so much, or has animated your collecting, is the ability to get to know the artists and have these really close personal relationships with them, to visit the studios, to see them at work, which I think is really great. And one thing that I spend a lot of time thinking about, and frankly sometimes keeps me up at night, is thinking about how do we create that same kind of connection for future generations who won't have that ability to go be in the studio with Joel Philip Myers, or with, I mean, so many of the artists that you might have in your collection now, with Stephen Powell. And I think that one of the
Whoops.
Do you have me?
Yeah, now you're back. One of the, and it stopped. Oops, you just stopped again. Is anybody else having issues, or is it Susie's connection? It's probably snowing in Corning or something. Nancy, do you want to pick up?
I would build on what Susie said. I think relationships is something that the relationship with the artist, I couldn't agree more with that statement. I'm trying to think of how to expand on what she was already talking about. I do think that finding ways to think about how the organization looks, sorry, I'm not being very articulate, but I'm thinking about how the organization looks inward versus looks outward. So thinking about how we can take people who are not already a part of this collecting community and having these experiences, but finding ways to connect people who are not already part of the AACG and bring them in to share those experiences with them and introduce them to the joy of those experiences. And looking at how each program that the AACG offers examines the possibilities of creating that or building on that experience for members, but also introducing that experience to people who are potential members.
That concept of how we treat people, our members, and how we are working with new members, that concept, and you just said it then about looking outside or looking inside. Can you talk a little more about what looking outside of our membership means, what that means to you?
What that means to me. I think that when I think about the AACG and my knowledge of, I think of it as a community of collectors who enjoy the activity of traveling and appreciating each other's collections and meeting the artists. I think of it as having a really strong social component between members, but also of building those relationships between members and artists, and exposing them to new artists. But what I don't know about AACG's programs, which you may very well have, but I'm just unaware of them, are programs that actively seek to connect those experiences to people who aren't already a member of the organization. And so does that mean, and I'd have to think more about types of programs. I guess going back to that initial point of meeting people where they are, where are people that have an affinity? How are there people who've been to your home, who have seen your collection and think that it's extraordinary, but they don't know how to envision that for their own life? And how do we identify people who have an affinity for collecting, and find a way to create programs that support those who have an affinity but are not yet members? I guess that's what I mean by looking outwards.
So looking for people that are interested in some type of art, not necessarily glass art, and interfacing with those people?
I mean, the AACG's mission is focused on glass, so I don't think that it necessarily, I think art in general is definitely broader, and then you can interest those people in glass as a material by educating them more about the history and potential of glass as a material, with great potential for the future if we as a field support it through the leadership of AACG, certainly. So yeah.
You said the magic word there in terms of research. Dr. Fischer, do you want to talk about conversations that we've had in responses to your Studio Glass project in Western North Carolina and how that relates to building these avenues for the future?
Sure, and we had the opportunity in Asheville this past summer. There was a big installation at the Biltmore of some of Chihuly's works. And so we had this opportunity to share with the community the rich history of Western North Carolina and the Studio Glass movement. And so AACG was one of our funders for the exhibition, which I absolutely appreciate. And what it allowed us to do, so not only was I able to go and do oral history interviews with the artists, which will end up at the Rakow Library. So for this sort of future thing that Susie was talking about, that we need to have this, you may not be able to have a conversation with these folks in 30 years, but you can hear someone else have a conversation with them. And so what it allowed us to do was the public who was coming in, because, they saw the big name Chihuly, we were able to educate them not just about Western North Carolina, but it was actually set up to educate them about glass. So there was a component of it that was, here's all the equipment, here's how it's used, so that when those people walked into North Carolina Glass Center or Lexington Glass Works or any of the local glass shops, if they went up to, further up north into the Spruce Pine, Bakersville, Burnsville area, that they would be able to have a new appreciation of what they were seeing, that they would not become experts, but sort of little mini experts, to walk into that situation with that knowledge and get excited about it. And so that's one way, I think, of educating people, both right now for whatever they're going to go walk in and see that day, that weekend that they were in town, but then also to get that information for the future, so that we have for posterity, for future research, that sort of thing. So.
Okay, Susie, you are back with us.
You guys can see more views of my messy office.
Do you want to finish those thoughts? I'm assuming you have a snowstorm or something up there.
We do. It's getting a little thick out there. But I'm hardwired in. Hopefully it will stay working.
All right.
I don't know what was covered while I was offline, but basically my two things are a little bit like what Alysia was saying, building bridges to the future. We need to put the work in a broader historical context. We need to, there hasn't been a lot of really good synthetic critical writing about studio glass in a long time. I would say Suzanne France's 1989 book, Contemporary Glass, and Martha Drexler Lynn's book, American Glass, 1960 to 1990, are some of the best ones, most synthetic. So one is putting the work that you may already have in your collections in a broader historical context, so that people can access it and understand it. And I mean people that might just encounter the work, but I also mean museum curators and others that might already have this work in their institutional collections. But in order for the field to stay valuable in the future, people need to understand it and want to show it and not deaccession it. So that's one. And on the other, it's supporting innovative works by people whose work, frankly, you might hate. Seriously. Things that you might not understand, that you never want to collect, that you don't really like, but that are the kinds of things that might be creating a new audience of people that we can't even yet know about. So planting some seeds for the future, because one thing that also comes to my mind is that when a number of the earliest studio glass collectors, who then went on to be mentors, people like George and Dorothy Sachs, or Al Marina and Paul Parkman, when they started collecting, it was a sort of wide open field, and they could feel like it was something they could get into. And even when many other people that started collecting in the 80s or 90s, still, it's something that you could join and build. And I think that feeling like it's something that's new that you can be a part of, or that new people can be a part of, is important. So that's what I wanted to say.
This seems like an appropriate time to talk about past pivotal glass experiences. And you mentioned two the other day that not only were great exhibits, but got publicity. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, I do. In fact, now that I'm over here, I've got this. So, the first one was Glass 1959, which I'm showing you upside down. Here are some things, which this museum, the Corning Museum of Glass, held in that year. It was the very first exhibition of contemporary glass in the world, contemporary international glass in the world, and it framed things in a new way for the public. It traveled not just here, but it traveled to the Met, to the Art Institute, to the Toledo Museum, to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and to Pittsburgh. And it got an enormous amount of press. It got covered in Look magazine. And it's not by accident. It was the first time that the Lubensky Brichtova was seen in the United States. And that by itself created this opening for the idea of glass really as sculpture. that laid the foundation for the studio glass movement just a few years later. And then in 1979, the museum reprised the exhibition, this one, hopefully you're all familiar with it. And that exhibition, which traveled both nationally and internationally, set the stage again. It inspired a number of private collectors, the Anne and Ronald Abramson, the Saxes, a number of other folks to start collecting glass. And importantly, it also spurred institutional collections. One of the exciting things that the research has come up with, that I've been doing, is that the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris started their whole glass collection because of this show. Same with museums in Spain and a lot of places. And it also spurred new scholarship, new writing, a whole new range of things. So for me, that's super critical. And I think of that especially because of that show that I'm doing in May called New Glass Now, which aims to do the same kind of thing for a new generation. I hope that, I mean, it's my best guess about how we can make this field generative and open for a new generation of collectors.
Interesting. Alysia, Dr. Fischer,
Yes.
do you have anything you would like to add in terms of how we can make this more exciting for a different group of an audience?
Well, you know, when Susie was talking about those exhibits, it reminded me quite a few of the artists who I spoke with talked about seeing that exhibit, and that being something that got them excited about then moving into glass. And then also, I don't know if this is true, Susie, you would know better, but when I was interviewing Fritz, he said that one of the rules associated with that was that you had to make it all by yourself. People who are really skilled factory glass workers wouldn't be able to be a part of it. Is that accurate?
That might be slightly apocryphal, but
okay.
But it is
Leave
true.
it to Fritz to do slightly apocryphal.
It is true that the 1959 show was almost entirely industrially designed glass, and the 1979 show was almost all studio glass, individual artist produced glass. So that shift is true. But I don't think it was a requirement. Nobody was stepping in on anybody's studios to see anyone else's hands touch the glass. That I'm aware of.
You know, it did make me wonder about how does that form the field? If you at least have this idea, because I had not realized previously that at the beginning there was this idea everybody had to do it completely on their own, and then it wasn't until later that there were teams who were working together. And so just how something like that impacts. It's a little off topic, but I was thinking about it while you were talking about those exhibits. How to get people excited? Well, part of it is, you know, so I have an 18-year-old and thinking about what excites an 18-year-old, which is younger than I know we're going, but we're thinking for the future, right? And a lot of that's going to be social media right now, social media and experiences. So where they can go and they can do something, or they can somehow engage with something in a really passive way at first, right? And then moving forward. And I know this is stuff that Susie has worked on a lot with the Corning, collection. So that's, I don't really speak that language, I have to say, like, say my daughter does, but I know there's something in there about the social media and getting people excited that way, so that you go from reaching outward to people who are maybe alone is very different from having these social gatherings that people don't even know about. It's kind of, in some ways, the opposite, I think, experience for somebody.
Right. Nancy, you first were introduced to glass, I'm assuming, because you're married to Dean Allison. Is that true, or were you introduced to glass long before you met Dean Allison? I
was introduced to glass through working at Penland. And Susie Silbert was actually one of my first glass friends at Penland when I first landed there in 2009. And so I don't have an art background, and I went to each slide presentation offered by Penland and really just absorbed knowledge about what was possible with each material and used that experience to get to know people. And it has certainly been through my husband, Dean, that I have become deeply embedded in the glass community and in those relationships, and have refined my view on glass, perhaps one might say. Mm-hmm.
So what was it that first excited you about glass, other than Susie Silbert, who is very exciting?
I honestly I love people and relationships the same as everyone who's connected to AACG. And I think that I connected with glass people, and I found those relationships. And then through those relationships, I became interested in, I started to observe and learn more about the processes, which then helped me to understand and appreciate people's skill. And then over time, I started to have confidence in my own view of what I liked and didn't like, which it took me understanding the processes and appreciating skill before I think I was confident expressing my own likes and dislikes outwardly, though I don't know that all people share that path.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I was struck by how what you were describing is pretty much the same way that I hear almost anybody that collects glass or even works in glass comes to it. Basically, first you have to find it, you're interested, you learn more, you learn more about technique, you go deeper into it. And that suggests to me, to the topic of this call, that that what's important is being able to provide the opportunity for those encounters. So, so we spent a lot of time talking about books, but another thing that I think ACG already does very well, and that might be having an effect that we just can't appreciate yet because there's a long onboarding process, is the grant support, for instance, of exhibitions. And I know that Alysia talked about how important that support was for her. Is important for me too. Show that I did while I was in Houston in the 2012 year was supported by AACG, and I know that that allowed people to experience glass that wouldn't necessarily otherwise. And I think that it's when we're trying to build new audiences, think about diversifying. I think the tendency is to focus on the people. How do you find those people? Where do you get them? You have to be able to identify them. Okay, find people that are interested in other art fields. And I think we do need to do that. But another way is to make there be opportunities for people to encounter glass in the course of their daily life. So there are people that we don't know yet. And that's something with this exhibition support. And I guess I would wonder if there's an opportunity to try to do something beyond, so if AACG is already supporting an exhibition, is there an opportunity to do some kind of other event or use that as a bridge? It might not work most of the time, but how many people do you really need? Like, how many people does it take to be exposed? Like, how many people go to SOFA versus how many people are real collectors in glass? Something I'm thinking about.
Well, that to me, that speaks to conversion. So, and let's talk about that. So you're exposing someone through an exhibition. How does the conversion occur? And this may be something we don't really know, but how does the conversion occur from someone who sees that exhibition and then decides they want more? So how? That's what I'm looking for.
I'll give two examples. One, so when I lived at Penland and I helped a bunch of people with their business plans, and most of you guys are better business people probably than have more experience, but when I would help artists try and get their work into galleries, I like to use, I had an approach where I felt like, let's map out a 5-year period, figure out what galleries you want to be in, and start sending, I figured it takes a certain number of touches for something to click. And so we'd start sending postcards to galleries so they could just throw them out, but it was passive reception with the work and the name. And then a couple years after doing that, you start reaching out in other ways, and it worked every single time. So I wonder if there's a way to do some kind of subtle touch. How do you build touches is, I think, the question. Mm-hmm. That I wonder if there's a way, if anyone else has an idea about that.
Nancy, you and I talked a bit about conversion, and that was really a primary thing. You want to speak to conversion and your interpretation of that, converting someone to be a glass enthusiast?
I mean, I think that I am not yet an expert. I think that I really agree with Susie's point about touches. I do think that that there's a building process. And so the idea of starting with something that's more passive and building something that's more active, people have to have time to build that level of passion. It doesn't happen overnight. And so we have to respect that process. I do think that there is, and this is something that we've all talked about, I think, in previous conversations, is in order to figure out how to best direct, how to come up with a method or series of touches that fit your audience, the first thing you have to do is determine who your audience is. And we've all talked about this. There's who is the young collector that you're trying to attract. They're not 30-something with a 2-year-old and no expendable income. You know, you're really looking for, I think, a group of people whose children are out of college, who are looking for ways as they approach retirement, thinking about how finding something that they're interested in and harnessing that kind of openness to new experiences as they enter a new phase of life. I think that a conversation between the members of AACG and others, I think you could really hone in first on who your target audience is, and then be able to come up with strategies that connect you to those audience members. And something I think earlier we were talking about in looking inward versus looking outward and meeting people where they are. I think a real key part of meeting people where they are is not, in my opinion, to attract new or younger audiences and new audiences, you can't try to shoehorn new audiences into your existing program. I think that there is something about creating programs that are designed for that audience, as opposed to thinking that a new audience is necessarily going to fit neatly into what you're already doing. So I do think it is taking a hard look at at who that audience is, and where they are in their lives, and in their and then how do you find a way to connect with them where they are in their life, and to develop programs that connect with them at that point in their life, if that makes sense.
Dr. Fischer, conversion is probably not a scholastic research topic, but weigh in on it, please.
Sure. And this is a really long-term idea, which is about students. I mean, there are lots of people who take glass classes who are never going to end up glass artists, but who have that built-in appreciation. They don't know who AACG is. How are they going to know that? How are you going to get your name in front of these people who, if they do end up developing that enthusiasm, I mean, and it's things as simple, I guess, as is there a poster that you send to all the glass programs in the country that they can put up and say, hey, we've got this $500 grant for students. How do you get in front of that group, which is maybe few generations back from what we're talking, but it's still that building for the future. So I would say students are sort of a low-hanging fruit in terms of getting your name out there so they know who you are. And there was somebody had said on the side something about lectures. I just wanted to weigh in on that in terms of converting people, building the audience. There are other organizations, for example, the American Society of Oriental Research, which is a terrible name, but it's an archaeological group like the Archaeological Institute of America. These groups have lecturers who they send they send all over the country to give lectures. And so I'm going to be giving a lecture at the Toledo Museum of Art next month through the Archaeological Institute of America to talk about ancient glass. So, is there even a lecture series where you say, hey, we've got people who we can put in front of you to talk about it? And somebody mentioned having the artists do that, which is great. Is there funding to send an artist to go and talk at a museum? Obviously, the Toledo Museum of Art's more glass oriented than most.
Whoa, something just happened.
Yeah, it got really weird.
And I wonder what that was. Huh. Goodness. This is a first for me. This has never happened before. Let's
Is
see.
he back?
Is everyone still here?
Yeah, okay.
I think so, but I'm not quite sure what just happened. Oh, there we go. Okay, we're back, but I don't know what that was. Can everybody hear me?
I
All
can
right.
still hear you.
And someone raised their hand, and I have absolutely no idea what that means.
I think they want to make a comment.
I think so too, and I would say put it in the chat box, and that would be.
Marilee, this might be a little bit off topic, but as an example of conversion or thinking about conversion with who that audience might be, when we first started talking about this, you asked me something about, it was about someone's idea of, I think it was either loaning or a drawing for artwork so that people could have it in their home. Do you remember that? There was a suggestion that someone had made, and I don't remember what the exact nature of it was, but that led us to talking about giving people a chance to experience not only relationships with artists, but also giving people a chance to experience what it's like to live with artwork. And I don't know exactly what that, like I could brainstorm ideas on what that could look like. This is probably not the place for that, but thinking outside of, so there's all of, I think research is really important, and I think exhibitions and encountering it in your daily life is really important. And I think conversion can have many, whether that be through mentorship or through exposures to seeing glass blowing happen, but also thinking about what it's like to live with artwork, and finding ways to help provide entries into that experience. Anyway, I think there's I think a whole nother conversation could be had about conversion and ideas about converting people and helping them imagine what it would be like to make this kind of investment.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the conversion topics was going from interest to passion.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that for everyone that I meet at AACG has that story.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interest to passion, but it's also involved either in, well, usually combination of meeting the artist and seeing the actual work. And I know Dr. Fischer had said the first time you see glass blown, that's the wow factor.
Mm-hmm.
And then not to minimize the work of someone who does cast glass, but
not quite as dramatic.
A little slower process. But that idea of generating, I guess I have two ideas I'd like to expand on. One is generating that interest and taking it from an interest to passion, and how could we as an organization do that? And the second is something we've talked about a lot, and that's elevating the form from a position so that all of our work becomes more valuable and the actual field becomes more valuable. So do you want to talk about that, or do you want me to pass it to Susie since she's...
On that note, pass to Susie, though I 100% agree that that's essential. So start with Susie. I'll think.
Well, no, go ahead. Well, I mean, go ahead, Nancy.
No, please, Susie.
I mean, if the idea is about how do we keep it valuable, that's the idea.
Well, I had two things. One was keeping it valuable, making it more valuable, elevating it as an art form.
So for me, I mean, I'm sorry, I feel like a broken record, but I really like, it's Paul Stankard's words, you guys, putting it in a historical context. That is like the first big thing Paul ever taught me in 2005. So there you go. I think we need to make the work intellectually available. We need to make it, so this is about scholarship, but this is also about that broadening. Like, we all know who all these folks are, and we have probably like a range of feelings about how they exist, but it seems really closed off from the outside. I know in my life as a curator that for many years my pals in other materials would say, Susie, or in just broad craft stuff or decorative arts, which is what I worked in, they would say, Susie, we really like you even though you're a glass person.
Even though.
For years. Or they call me up and they say, this still happens, I have glass or I have money for glass, I don't understand it, I don't know how it connects to anything else. And part of the reason for that is that it seems like a closed system. We haven't done a great job of synthesizing, making openings, talking about contemporary issues, and putting the glass alongside other materials also. But I think even just the glass itself, we haven't done a great job. And I see in the side that Tim Tate said, plugged Bill Warmis's article in the American Craft Inquiry, which is a good article talking about glass criticism in the last years. But there's a difference between glass criticism and like real hard-hitting scholarship that really that really takes an art historical approach. And I think sometimes that's a difficult thing to do in an article length form. But there are other ways to do it. I mean, the one thing that came up in the pre-conversation, some avenues, not reinventing the wheel, not starting something, but an ability to support work that's already happening or being able to extend it. So listen, you guys, I work for the Corning Museum of Glass, so I'm always shilling for the Corning Museum of Glass. But this came up with Alysia. Alysia has applied many times to our Journal of Glass Studies, which is the preeminent kind of scholarly journal of glass, and also to our grant for scholars working in glass. And it's a bummer for her and for many others who want to work in contemporary glass or any glass really from 1945 on. It's not something that we currently have a venue for. So that seems to me like a way, whether that go, or, supporting New Glass Review or supporting the expanded kind of scholarship, get the writing in a way that people can understand it, that isn't just about the same 10 studio glass artists that we seem to focus on, and get that into the hands of more people is one way, I think. It's a long strategy. I'll loop it back. If we're talking about how do we keep this stuff valuable, I mean, it's got to be a slightly long view.
Yes.
But that's a way.
I want to also add to that, that also might be another way of looking outward, thinking about how to position glass within the context of critical research in the field of art, as opposed to focusing so narrowly on glass. We want to focus on glass as an essential part of the field of art, and not, and Susie, please, I do not have all of you speak to this so much more articulately than I ever could, but I do think there is some amount of positioning glass as art, and not only focusing so narrowly on.
But sorry, let me just jump in.
No, please.
And I don't mean to take us off topic, and you can mute me anytime, Marilee. But I feel like the dominant narrative promoted by a lot of folks in glass enthusiasts, and the Art Alliance for the last several decades is the idea of promoting glass as art. And I think that is actually, that is a little bit too broad. Not all, what does that even mean? That's why we need to think about what part of the art world does X work fit into, what part of the art world does Y artwork, glass work fit into, because it doesn't actually all fit into the art world, and the advocating for it to have fit that way is kind of uncomfortable. And there's another way to think about, okay, we can think about what's outside, but we can also think about what we're doing and what is, teasing out the nuances there, or thinking about it in relationship to ceramics, or thinking about it, not just always in this big hierarchical notion that it needs to be somehow contemporary art and validated by other people that are contemporary art.
And critical writing on that subject would help to place glass in the broader, in this conversation, in a way that could really help to navigate the future of glass in all of its forms.
Dr. Fischer, do you want to talk about what you found in doing your research in terms of what there is available for studio glass for serious researchers?
Sure. First, I wanted to just jump in and mention about what I found when I was doing the research with the North Carolina glass artists. was there was a lot of stuff about the Back to the Land movement that I didn't expect to find, and why people chose to come to Western North Carolina and sort of what they were leaving. That was the other thing I interviewed people about. Not only why did you come here, but why did you leave the place where you were, which was many large cities and race riots and other things that were going on. And so to place it within that context, it was really interesting for me to be able to do that. And then what was the actual question you wanted me to answer, Marilee?
The actual question was, what did you find in your research that made you feel we really needed to go deeper in other regions? And
so right now, if you're a researcher and you want to find out, like I did, about Western North Carolina glass, you can look up the Archives of American Art, see who has done interviews in the past. You can use the Rack-Howe Library's resources, and then you can use local resources. And what I found was it was really difficult to do that without actually traveling to the different institutions. And so I might know that there's an article with, Gary Beecham, for example, but I don't know what's in that article unless I actually travel to that place. Sometimes I could get people to send me links, but they were links that would expire after 2 weeks. It's not as accessible as I have found as somebody who also has a background in archaeology. I could do all my research that I'm not doing out in the field, I could do from home, or I could interlibrary loan some things and get what I need. So there was more of sort of a barrier than I expected, especially if we want people to be writing about glass in the future. They need better access. And again, the Rack-Howe Library is an amazing institution, and that's actually why I want to have the oral histories live there, because I do think that's a great place to go. But let's say somebody's studying the Back to the Land movement. Are they going to think, oh, I should go to the Rack-Howe Library to see how that impacted glass artists? So I'm still trying to figure out, how do we tie into other kinds of scholarship easily? How do other people find out these resources? So I guess that's where I am with that.
And suffice it to say, there has not been a lot of serious research around the country on the studio glass movement. Am I correct in that?
Well, and Susie can comment on this as well, but I feel like there's become this dominant narrative about Toledo and about the Pacific Northwest. And that when you ask a student about, hey, where are the important places, they're going to talk about Toledo and Wisconsin. They're going to talk about the Pacific Northwest, but this was happening everywhere. This was, part of the zeitgeist. And so there are all these stories to be told, which may lessen, in some people's mind, the importance of some of the other places, but it's a real story. And so finding more of that information, lots of people were experimenting with glass. Susie, did you have a...
I'm just thinking, actually what that suggested to me was two things. The first one is, most of what exists are exhibition catalogs, pretty pictures, and like a little bit of information about the artist. That's of some use, but it seems to be more about a little bit more vanity than building this broader framework that I think we're talking about. So that's one. And two, another piece of this that I think is critical is also making sure that there are other voices involved in writing this history, that there have been some things written, and certainly lots of articles, but it's often the same voices who we really value. But if you want to have the work interpreted in a different way, we need to empower different people to be able to comment. And so that means, that means supporting their research, supporting their work. Another thing is like supporting digital access to things in other repositories that already exist. Not to shill, but to shill. And I mean, those are the kinds of things. Those are something, because we need to have more than just what's already being done. And that is something that I feel like AACG already plays a critical role in, and can continue to play a critical role in, both as an institution and as individuals. So trying to make sure that when you build, you guys are opportunity makers. So when you build an opportunity, to make sure that you are thinking about in those opportunities, are we creating possibilities for new people that haven't had that? And that's part of also, I think, builds in what Nancy's talking about. That's both for any of the writers or any of the artists that we're talking about, but it's also about the potential new collectors. Making sure that we're inviting people to participate.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 7 minutes left, and although I was going to try to read the chat and answer questions, I'm going to have to do it offline because I can't multitask the way I used to be able to. So I'm going to need an assistant for the next one of these we do. So my question to the three of you is, was there something we did not cover today that you would like to have covered and make it as a closing statement, or a closing question, or a closing whatever you want it to be? Nancy, you want to start? You're on.
Oh,
I'm looking at you.
I'm thinking. I feel like I agree 100% with the other, with Alysia and Susie, that research is critical to advancing our field. I also believe that research and scholarship, they are essential. And I think that, and I guess the one other thing I would add, I'm just trying to collect a thought here to share with you all. I don't know what the membership of AACG is. Do you know what that membership is?
Well, no, I don't. If you want demographics, I know
well, I was wondering about numbers. Like, is it 100 or 500 or 1,000?
600, and it's been around 600 for many years. It's hovered around 600.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I would just say is that there 600. I was thinking about a campaign in social media and reaching tons and tons of people. I guess what I would like to just end with is this idea that by adding 20 people, by adding a small number of people, that makes a significant difference.
Yes.
That we can really, that overnight, this isn't a transformation that has attracting, converting more people from interest to enthusiast doesn't have to be adding in hundreds of new members. It can be adding in 1 new member, 5 new members, 10 new members. It grows. And to find ways to start small and to test those out, and then to take that knowledge and to go further. And so setting reasonable bites and goals for success and working towards those will produce results, I think. And so just trying to continue these conversations in ways that lead towards these manageable but really important steps forward. I think I commend you all for this effort that you're undertaking.
Thank you. It is a passion, as you know. So thank you. Dr. Fischer, do you want to?
Sure.
Anything you haven't covered that you were have a burning desire to cover today?
Well, it actually relates to a comment that somebody had about the effort to preserve the information that's out there. So, I have a PhD in anthropology, and the anthropology of craft is really sort of a passion. And so that is something that for the past 20 years I've been thinking about, actually longer than that now that I think about it, and what I was doing was work in the Middle East and seeing how glass artists were working and trying to document that. But we need to do that here now. I mean, the aging of the population, we have opportunities that are going to go away. So while I think there are many, many things that can be done, in terms of what I feel passionate about seeing this organization do would be, how do we get the information and preserve it so that we have it, so that you can get future people excited. So, I mean, there is some urgency behind that, behind collecting that information directly from the source before they're gone.
You mean the lifespan of the artists that we're going to lose some before we, a good point. Susie, do you have, reality. It is the reality. I'm living it. Susie, how about you?
Well, first I would like to say that I just thank you for having me on and rattle along in the snowstorm in my office. Good for me, but also it's been so nice to read the comments on the side and to hear from my fellow panelists. I'm like, those guys are really good. So that's very nice. So thank you. My summary would be, one, remember that you don't have to completely reinvent the wheel, that there are things there that you can work on supporting more what's there. Some of that you do really well. I think Nancy's point about, small incremental growth is important. Like, it doesn't have to be this overnight transformation. Thinking about the future, thinking about, Alysia did a good job of talking about preserving what has happened, and I will just advocate again for the future, for helping to help make sure that the glass keeps being vital and that people keep seeing a broad range of glass. That's really important. So helping to support new work and new folks thinking. And then the last thing didn't come up at all, which I appreciate. Maybe that was Marilee, because I said, I'm tired of hearing the following, but I'll just say it. So,
oh no, I know what it is.
Yeah. So oftentimes when I'm in this conversation, what I hear is, oh, millennials don't want to collect, or millennials only want experience, or something like that. And I like to say two things. One, that was one Style magazine article in New York Times that everybody just keeps repeating. And two, millennials are pretty young still, and it's going to take them a while to start collecting. So it's important to think about, I would say, think about what you, when you started collecting and how that grew, and give the millennials a little break. Start targeting maybe people that are older than all of us. And finally, you guys as a group have an enormous wealth of experience and knowledge. And you can work on, it's corning. I don't know if you can hear the whistle. It's
5 o'clock, huh?
Yes, you can work on channeling that expertise in specific directions. I mean, holy cow, I have a lot to learn from you, and I look forward to seeing where it goes. That's it.
Well, I love that challenge, and for all of our AACG members, I want you to accept that challenge, and we're gonna channel what's best about being passionate about glass art and figure out how to spread that to the world. So thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Alysia. Thank you, Susie, and thank you everyone who attended. I think it had some glitches, but a pretty good first teleconference. So. We are going to post this on the website, and I'm going to take all of our comments, and I'll also communicate those back out to the membership, so that everyone has an understanding of what transpired today. So thank you so much, and keeping AACG great and making it greater. Have a good day. I'm going to end the meeting.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.